Thank you, Madam Chairs and ranking members for holding this very important meeting. I think space weather is one of the most under-prioritized subjects that we have in Congress. We heard from a panel previously that we missed a solar interruption, or CME that you call it, a couple years ago by 1 week on our orbit that would have knocked out all our satellites, killed all our power grids, and they could only describe it. They couldn't even quantify the damage other than say it would have been catastrophic. There was a book written about a similar knocking out of our grid called 1 Second After. I don't know if any of y'all have ever read that book before, but it's just as frightening, and that was written from reports that members of Congress have received on the EMP threat, same as effect as we'd have from one of those huge solar eruptions. And so a question that I have for you is, what plan does our government have in place if our satellites or spacecraft detected geomagnetic storm headed right for us?
So it would depend, of course, on which sector we're talking about. When a big event is coming, we are in touch with the satellite operators around the world, power grid operators, the aviation dispatchers, and they'll reroute the flights away from the poles and whatnot. But the key right now, there's an effort underway within the Space Weather Operations and Research and Mitigation Working Group at OSTP to define benchmarks where we want to say how big is big so we can protect against that level, because that's kind of where we're at right now. The step is we've got to recognize that number, that value, and then work with industry to take the appropriate steps. It's happening already to some degree, obviously, with the power grid. We have given them a number, the volts per kilometer. If we get to this value, you need to assess, will you survive? They are doing that right now. They'll understand which equipment is vulnerable and then take action to protect it. So hopefully in the coming not too distant future, we get to a place where we think that they can withstand almost Carrington type event. So we're working on getting there because we know a lot about this storm. We didn't 20 years ago. We do now. We're working towards mitigating, hardening the system, if you will, to withstand one of these big events.
Yeah, I've noticed industry hasn't had much interest in hardening. Yeah. Industry is interested in bottom line and bonuses for the next fiscal year. Right. Yeah. What do you think we should do to overcome that?
Well, I think that, and I mentioned this already, FERC stepping in and telling them that they had to do directing them to do this assessment was critical. And where it's difficult is not in the high latitude states that border Canada recognize this threat because they experience it quite regularly. It's the mid latitude states and the lower latitude. Those folks could have been there for 40 years working that system, and they'll say, why am I worried about this? I've never seen this before. Says we haven't had an 1859 event since 1859. Right. So the only way really to get them motivated to move and do the right things, largely I feel, was FERC stepping in.
Yeah. What besides the outages that caused Quebec to lose their power for about 9 hours, what other ones are we aware of? Are there a bunch of other minor ones?
Yeah, there was. So actually, yeah, there was. We go back to 1859 for that big event. 1921, there was a paper published just last month suggesting that the 1921 storm might have been as big as Carrington. And that 21 storm was the one that caused a lot of fires in railway. They call it the railway storm because it actually caused fires downtown Manhattan in the railway station due to the induced current. So there was that one, and the one you mentioned in July 2012, which was a near miss. So there's 3 or 4 Carrington-class events. There's been many, many others. The Bastille Day events, Dr. Fox just whispered in my ear, was a big one that occurred in 2000. There was the 2003 event that brought the grid down in Malmö, Sweden, and damaged many transformers in the ESCOM network in South Africa. So I could go on and on with a list of these.
Obviously, the research is important to the survival of our species. You know, what effect do you think we would have globally if the 1859 event happened today?
Well, I think it would be significant in many ways, obviously. Again, depending on which sector, a huge part of this whole national strategy and action plan that was referenced already is one of the first big parts of that is assess the vulnerability of our critical infrastructure. We're in the process of doing that now to get to a point where we can accurately answer your question. It's just what would happen if we got this level of storming. We have still a lot of work to do to understand that vulnerability.
Okay, thank you. So we really don't know. Madam Chair, thank you for letting him answer the question.